Imagine a stifling night in a small town, the silence shattered by the clatter of tools and hurried voices. There, in the shadows of the old movie theater, Rafaela appears, hands trembling yet gaze unwavering, standing face to face with a crew about to destroy the one place that holds what little joy remains from her past. Suddenly, he shows up, Gustavo, in a flawless suit, hard expression, a man used to doing business without ever looking back. But tonight, he wasn't expecting to be challenged by someone like her. Their eyes meet. There's tension, anger, but also something impossible to explain. Rafaela, shaking on the inside, grips the door as if holding on to her own life. "I won't let you destroy this place," she yells, and no one moves. Who will back down first? The woman fighting for the memories of her whole life, or the man who never learned to miss anything at all? What lies beneath this standoff? Could some long-buried secret ruin everything before love even has a chance to begin? Only those who stick around till the end will find out if, among the ruins of the past, a new love is truly possible. It was still dark when Rafaela arrived at the old cinema. The cold of early morning made the glass doors shake, and the city outside was still asleep, only slowly waking to the occasional distant headlights and truck engines humming low. She pulled her coat tighter, pretending it was armor, though she knew inside there, all she had was her own courage. The air smelled of old dust and faded film, and every step stirred up golden motes for just an instant, like memories coming alive in the weak flashlight beam. Since childhood, Rafaela had known every corner of that place. The threadbare carpet, the stairs with the shaky banister, the movie posters nobody remembered anymore. For a second, she almost forgot why she was there, until the noise of machinery crept closer, and a cold emptiness twisted inside her stomach. Outside, a van and some men hauling planks. She recognized them, people from the construction company, and her body tensed in shock, like an animal threatened in its own den. She hadn't expected him. The man in a suit, dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night, perfectly groomed hair, and the look of someone who never got caught in the rain without a pricey umbrella, to be right behind them, holding a stack of papers as if wielding a sentence. There was something in Gustavo's bearing that already said it all before he even opened his mouth. Cold eyes, blocking the way without so much as lifting a finger. He seemed to be searching for something in there that didn't exist. Safety, logic, maybe just peace. He didn't find it, because Rafaela was standing between him and the auditorium, arms crossed, chin high, her heart pounding faster than it should. "Good morning, miss," he said, but it wasn't a greeting, it was a warning. Almost a dare. "You can't come in," she answered, every word pushed out like it weighed a ton. "I won't let you start anything here without the council's approval." The look they traded was like a cold blade. Neither lowered their eyes. The workers hesitated behind him, waiting for the man who signed their checks to decide. Gustavo sighed, flipped through the papers with practiced calm, but his hands trembled ever so slightly on the pages. He was annoyed because he'd planned to take care of this quickly, but nothing here would be easy. "I need to inspect the site. My grandfather asked me to come," he justified, as if that might lighten what he was about to do next. But his voice was hard, giving nothing away. "Why now? After decades abandoned. Just because you want to tear it down and put something else up?" Rafaela's throat tightened. She took a step forward, right into the space between him and the door. "This place is memory for a lot of people. It's not just a building, not just a piece of land." Silence filled everything. Outside, the city was beginning to stir, but inside the cinema, there were only two worlds trapped in the same corridor. For a moment, Gustavo looked around, and it was as if he saw the place through her eyes. The cracked ceiling, the mustiness, the traces of a life nobody else saw in the ruins. She noticed the way he bit the edge of his lip, annoyed, but at a loss for how to defuse the standoff. She was trembling, too, but refused to budge, even if they had to stay there all day. It was like they were playing chess with words, both waiting for the other to make a wrong move. "Do you work here?" he asked, a bit quieter, glancing at his clipboard as if trying to remember some rule. "I take care of this place's history. I'm a restorer. My job is to make sure nobody erases what was lived here," she answered, letting a bit of honesty slip into her tone. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about not being invisible again. Inside, Gustavo just wanted to get the job done, hand in the inspection, and leave. He was hungry. He hadn't had breakfast, was groggy from a sleepless night, his head buzzing with his father's expectations. Just another problem, nothing more. Or was it? In that moment, he realized something in her voice echoed inside him. A quick memory from when he was a kid and snuck into cinemas like this with his grandfather. He almost smiled, but the smile never fully appeared. When Rafaela saw his hesitation, fear flashed through her. Because for a second, she thought she might convince him, and that scared her. She didn't want to rely on anyone's decision. She preferred confrontation. In a fight, at least she knew the rules. The few times she trusted, she lost everything. Mother, home, people. Their eyes crossed again. He looked away, straightening his suit like he was putting on armor. He signaled for the workers to wait outside. Rafaela caught a glimpse of his hand rubbing his forehead, a nervous gesture for someone who claims indifference. Cold wind crept in through the broken roof, whipping the air. They stood side by side, still apart, yet trapped in the sense that nothing here would be simple. Outside, the city could be heard faintly. Footsteps on wet asphalt, the first bakery opening. Civilization thumped in the distance, warped by the silence inside the cinema. In a nearly invisible movement, Rafaela touched the banister with her fingers, anchoring herself. She tried to hide the panic twisting in her gut, knowing that if she forgot how to care for this place, she'd fall apart. Gustavo observed everything with hard, cold eyes, but inside him was a strange confusion. Or it wasn't just inside him. He noticed her breathing, short and controlled. She noticed his ring tapping the paper, a dry sound every time his hands moved. Each had their own defense ritual. No one gave in, but no one broke down either. When Gustavo spoke, his voice was lower, almost slicing the silence like a razor. "I'll give it time. I need to look at this properly," he decided, and for a moment, he sounded like a tired man, not just a businessman. She leaned against the doorway, her eyes full of something impossible to name. Exhaustion, anger, an old hurt begging not to be forced to trust again. He recognized that expression. He'd seen it once, years ago, in the mirror, when he realized what it cost to give up your own past. They left the cinema without a word. Outside, the sun peeked through clouds, ready to illuminate ruins with more history than any signature. Under that sky, the two of them understood this fight was only the beginning. No one won that day, but no one walked away unscathed either. It was only the first clash, the start of a silent war, full of hard stares and buried thoughts. But something was already changing under the dust and layers of defense. A kind of respect, still silent, flavored with old pain and a tiny, barely perceptible hope. The cinema breathed with them, amidst falling plaster and unspoken promises. And even without admitting it, both had felt, in their own skin, that nothing here would ever be the same. The silence inside this place tastes of old dust and forgotten memory. No music plays. Sometimes the wind nudges a loose door, and the sound makes everything seem bigger than it is. I see Rafaela walking slowly down the theater aisle, as if every step means more than simply walking. It's almost like talking to another life, long before everything went wrong. She exhales, heavier than the ruin around her. The air is cold. It makes even the light move slowly. Rafaela fits her fingers into a crack in the wall, searching for some fragment of childhood her mother took away. With a quiet gesture, she presses her forehead softly to the plaster, eyes closed. And I see there's no one else there but her, at least for a few seconds. Time is frozen. Outside, the rain still falls a little. The sound of drops on the torn canvas roof blends into the echo of her own thoughts. She feels time lagging, that strange feeling of wanting to go home, but only being able to watch from afar. She lingers, just breathing deep, her chest opening slowly like a door that never quite closes. I recall how she once confessed, almost whispering so no one would hear, that as a girl she used to hide her notebooks under the seat in the last row, running from the rain, running from the absence of an embrace. The cinema was a cocoon. No one judged muffled crying. No one asked where she'd sleep that night. The darkness was a hug. That's what she misses, that silence that demanded nothing in return. In those moments when Rafaela forgets to hide who she is, her face says everything, a tight jaw that refuses to let a tear fall, the shadowed, tired eyes giving away how long she's been exhausted. But her way of touching things is still gentle, reverent, and curious, like a child discovering a secret. Gustavo, across the hall, can barely hide how uncomfortable he is in this world he doesn't understand. He turns his phone over in his fingers, swiping the screen just to do something. Every sound she makes, a sigh, a creaking floorboard, a chair kicked by accident. He looks up, quick. Pretends not to care, but can't look away for long. There's something in his eyes between judgment and uncertainty. Maybe it's a hunger for answers, maybe just fear of feeling anything. The distance between them isn't just physical. There's space in the air, a chill, and neither knows how to bridge it. But I see, and I think Rafaela feels, too, that his eyes are beginning to grow tired of being so guarded. Sometimes Gustavo even forgets his expensive suit, the urgent assignment. He watches her run her hand along the worn counter, the way she trails her fingernail down the wood, soft and thick with dust. He says nothing, but for a flash, curiosity flares in his gaze. The silence grows, heavy with unsaid questions. Rafaela doesn't look at him, but she feels him there. The air shifts, less cold. Or maybe that's just hope, that foolish thing that insists on being reborn after so many falls. She sits gently in a chair that still holds weight, closes her eyes. Inside her mind, the questions won't stop. Why is he here? Why would a guy like him waste time looking at this place? Does he just want to see the building fall? Or is there more? I remember she's afraid to trust, afraid to lower her guard, and lose the only home she's ever known all over again. Every time she lets the past slip into a silent tear, she swears it'll be the last. But standing here, seeing her shadow mix with the shadow of the theater, I know there's just as much fear of being alone as of letting someone in. Gustavo draws closer, but not by much. The thud of his shoes on the loose floorboard gives him away. He wants to ask, but freezes. Deep down, he doesn't know why he feels like this. What's the point of all this attachment to old junk? She seems different, almost hypnotized. Is this just her way to stall everything? When she notices, she braces her shoulders, ready for a fight. But Gustavo doesn't provoke, just brushes lightly at a stack of worn-out papers, looks sideways, masks his interest. He tries to remind himself it's just stone, just dead wood. But the way Rafaela moves makes everything seem alive. She shoots him a quick look just to see how far she can go. He doesn't react. In that split second, everything changes a little. No attack, no retreat. Just a flicker of doubt, a crack in the surface no one expected. The rain grows louder, blending with the tightness in their chests. Outside, people run, horns blare, life rushes by. In here, everything is slowness, a museum, a wait. A stopped clock. That's when longing weighs heavier, when silence is almost a conversation. I catch myself thinking, sometimes, the ones who act like they feel nothing are those who need a safe place the most. The way Gustavo observes her hands, stained with lime and paint, gives away his desire to understand, but pride holds him back. He was never good at feeling. He grew up learning that nostalgia was impractical, memory just pulled the handbrake. Yet here, surrounded by scraps of 1,000 dreams, it's impossible not to be moved, even a little. The scene ends like this. The two of them on opposite sides of a broken-down cinema, the air thick with both past and promise. She trying to hide her pain. He's searching for some meaning in the cracks on the floor. No conversation, no dramatic gesture. Just the inevitable weight of memory, quietly stitching a beginning between two people who no longer wanted to be hurt. And even without realizing it, they find their only truce in the silence. Because sometimes, in the most ruined places, the beginning of something new takes root, even if no one can quite believe it yet. For now, all that exists is this space, cold, battered, and still somehow full of something that endures. The sound of boots on cracked concrete echoes among empty seats. Gustavo seems out of place there, with his crisp shirt and that mask of forced boredom. But it's impossible not to notice the hidden discomfort in the way he fidgets with his fingers, nervous. The air smells of mold. A single beam of light slips through the hole in the ceiling, swirling with dust, and coming to rest on Rafaela. She pretends not to notice him watching, pretends to have everything under control. But inside, every time he draws near, her chest tightens. It was supposed to be just another battle, she thinks. Another rich man, wanting to erase other people's histories. So why, this time, does the fear feel different? Gustavo breathes deep, swallows his words, swallows his pride. When he does speak, it's softer than he expected. I didn't come here to fight, he says, placing his hand on a chair, the cold metal creaking under his weight. In that gesture, there's more weariness than aggression. You can just make out the almost invisible tremor in his hands as he fidgets with his sleeve. Rafaela doesn't answer right away. She grips her work badge tightly. The silence stretches between them, full of all the things that can't be said. For her, silence never felt safe. She learned early that silence often meant abandonment. Even so, she doesn't give in. She meets his eyes. Her gaze is deep, dark. There's a contained anger there, and a fierce desire to be seen. Gustavo tries again, looks over the rows of seats, the graffiti on the walls. He leans against one of them awkwardly. I know this place means something to you, he says. Have you always been this way, defending lost causes? On another day, maybe Rafaela would have answered with sarcasm or plain disdain. But the way he asks, without that businessman's armor, chips away at her defenses. She sees his hands, tense, his eyes darting. Maybe, just maybe, he isn't just a villain in a suit. I'm not defending a lost cause, she says. Not everything needs to become a shopping center parking lot. Sometimes, holding on is the only way to remember who we were. He lets out half a laugh, but it's not mockery. He honestly doesn't know how to react to the weight of her truth. She notices he can't look straight at his own feelings. He's carrying old guilt too, she thinks. The conversation stalls. The smell of dust, dying light, the chill in the air, everything tries to push them apart. But then Gustavo takes a breath, half on impulse. Let's make a deal, he suggests. Show me what you see here. Convince me this place matters. If you can't, we'll go ahead with the demolition. But if you can, maybe we'll figure another way. For a moment, Rafaela almost smiles. Just a game to him, she thinks. He wants time to sort out his own business, masking it as interest. But there's something tired in his voice, a kind of loneliness she recognizes. Against herself, she wants him to really see, not just pretend. And what's the catch? She asks, keeping her guard up. None, I swear, he says. Just a challenge. Show me why it matters so much. I promise I'll listen. The word promise lingers in the air. Rafaela senses danger. That's where she always got hurt before, believing in pretty words. But his look isn't the look of a traitor. There's doubt, hesitation, even a tentative respect. For the first time, she doesn't see arrogance, but a confusion as tangled as her own. She agrees, but only because the desperation to save the cinema outweighs her fear of trusting. She doesn't say it aloud, but thinks, if I have to lose, let it be fighting till the end. So she starts to show him. Her voice wavers at first, but gains strength quickly. She talks about nights as a child, sleeping in torn-up seats. Silent films played on the walls, smiles filling the room even when there was nothing to eat at home. While she speaks, she doesn't quite meet his eye. She touches doors, old posters, and through these gentle acts, hands over memories without needing to spell them out. Gustavo watches, tries to maintain his facade of carefully weighing pros and cons, but it slips away little by little. He sees how hard she works not to expose her pain, but knows, because he's felt it too. You can't hide a wound when someone's really looking. Mid-sentence, she stops. Their eyes meet. For a heartbeat, neither of them breathe. The silence is heavy, but different now. He wonders if he's ever felt this before. The strange mix of admiration and wanting to protect, without even having the right. He remembers his grandfather, the old man's stories about the city's past, and the fear of being forgotten. Deep down, Gustavo realizes he's, for the first time, curious about something more than numbers. Doubt creeps in. What if she's right? What if tearing down this theater erases something from himself, too? Even if he can't say what. Rafaela notices the distant glance in his eyes, and inside, wrestles a foolish urge to comfort him. But they aren't friends, don't have pacts of trust. So, before retreating, she says quietly, almost by accident, the story isn't just mine. Gustavo, without realizing, touches the frame of an old poster. His fingertip finds dust and memories, and he feels a discomfort hard to admit. In that exchange, something is born that neither wants to name. The visit ends unresolved. The deal hangs between them, heavy with risks and small promises. They walk out together, down the dark corridor where memories blend with hopes of starting over, and at each step, the silence between them shifts. It's not just about fear anymore. Now, it hides a shy hope that begins to fill the emptiness of the past. Rafaela shoved the door open with her shoulder, keys jingling in her hand. The dark hallway seemed narrower, stuffier, as if it carried her exhaustion too. She glanced around the small apartment, tidied up too neatly for someone who lived alone, dropped her backpack, feeling all her burdens slip out with it, and for a moment just stood there, hearing nothing but her own heart. The echoes were still alive. The shouting back at the theater, the old dust clinging to her hair, and most of all, his face. Gustavo. The way he almost masked his nerves, but faltered just a bit when she mentioned the letters she'd found behind the screen. Rafaela slumped onto the couch, pressed her fingertips together, and closed her eyes. Tried to push it all away, but the memories kept lining up. Her childhood of always being packed and ready to leave, the father who disappeared, her mother drifting further away, and the constant fear of trusting someone again. She grabbed her phone, opened and closed chats, no new messages. The house felt thick with silence, almost like a mother's embrace, but one that frightened her too. Why couldn't she cry? She wanted to, but tears seemed to have dried up years ago. All she could manage was a deep breath, a pang in her gut. Was it hunger, or missing something she'd never learned to name? She wanted to call someone, to tell them how rough her day had been, but her contact list was too short. On the table, the lamp barely lit up a photo frame still closed, the photos all face down. Would it have been easier if she hadn't tried so hard to forget? She stared at her own hand, shaking slightly. All she really wanted was a safe place where she didn't have to fight so hard. But she was alone, battling for something that wasn't just hers. The cinema belonged to everyone, but she was always the one raising her voice. Across town, in a hotel room too nice to be cozy, Gustavo lounged against an armchair. The digital clock glowed on the nightstand, 12:31 a.m. The coffee pot was cold and untouched, smelling of a sleepless night. Gustavo loosened his tie, unbuttoned his shirt, but still couldn't breathe easy. The puzzle spun in his head. Why did this skinny restorer, with dark eyes and a steady voice, get under his skin like that? He tried to convince himself it was just business, that this was nothing but one more obstacle. But it wasn't true. It was something else. Maybe it was the way she didn't blink under pressure, as if daring anyone to get close, while silently hoping someone would. Gustavo flicked through his phone, opened his message app, but there was no one to text. Work, contracts, work friends. None of them could make him feel less lost in this strange city that should have felt like home. He stood up, went to the window. The rain drummed softly, tapping the glass like a shy hand. Outside, city lights flicked off one by one as the town sank into deep sleep. Only he, wide awake, felt his heart racing over a woman he barely knew. He'd learned not to believe in passion, in nostalgia, those stories people told themselves to justify their longings and bad choices. But with her, something shifted. Suddenly, the past mattered. Suddenly, he felt less made of stone. And at the same time, he was angry. Not at her, but at himself for being so shaken. Ridiculous. He wanted to brush it off with the cool efficiency of numbers and deals. But he couldn't. He shut his eyes, remembering, unexpectedly, being a child running through his grandmother's yard in this very town. The smell, wet earth, ashes in a wood stove. The sharp sting of longing he always pretended not to feel. After all, being an heir meant not suffering, not having history, just moving forward. Rafaela, already in bed, stared up at the ceiling. You could hear the neighbor coughing on the other side of the thin wall. She didn't know if she'd have the strength to face it all again tomorrow, but she knew she had to try. She felt angry at that elegant man, so purposefully polite it seemed like every move was practiced so nothing could touch him. But remembering his restless fingers, she realized Gustavo, too, was full of tiny cracks. And, strangely, that didn't scare her. She imagined his hand running through his hair, impatient, lost. Wondered what he thought of her. Did he think she was stubborn? Naive? Or did he see deeper, the way no one else had? Fear clamped her throat. What if she was fooling herself again, seeing kindness where there was only self-interest? She'd been hurt before, believing sweet words and lingering glances. She couldn't let herself fall now, not at this moment. And yet, She felt something pulling, an invisible thread, her thoughts returning to him. Back at the hotel, Gustavo tossed his blazer onto the chair and headed to the bathroom. Splashed cold water on his face, met his own eyes in the mirror. His reflection looked tired, older. He wished his grandfather were there to tell him if any of this was worth it. The weight of choices, of replaying stories that didn't belong to him. Gustavo's hand trembled, as if hiding an old secret. He knew that, if it were up to him alone, he'd drop everything and disappear for a while. Forget about contracts, expectations, that inheritance that felt more like a curse. But going back was impossible. Moving forward was the only way. She sat on the edge of the bed, stared at the empty ceiling, and finally let herself feel what she'd been avoiding: fear. Fear of failing, of proving she wasn't as strong as she pretended, of getting lost inside her own story. And, silently, a longing to see Rafaela again, even if it meant arguing, even if it meant fighting, or just listening to her voice defend the impossible. He wished he could hold her hand, not to persuade her, but to understand her. The room grew colder when he turned off the light. He kept wondering if she could sleep, if she felt the same restless ache, a silence that wasn't peace, but a promise. And that feeling, impossible to explain, as if some invisible bond already existed long before either of them had the courage to admit it. Rafaela turned over in bed, feeling the weight of mist sleep settle over her skin. Sometimes, it felt like every door she'd closed was really a window disguised, an opening to something new. She longed for the next day, not expecting it to be easy. She wished, like a prayer, that someone would see in her more than just the one defending the past, that someone would see a person willing to love, even with no guarantees. And, for the first time in a long while, she fell asleep with someone's name on her lips, tangled up with all her fears and a stubborn thread of hope. The cinema smelled old in a way that was hard to put into words. It wasn't just dust and mildew. There was something like forgotten popcorn lingering under the seats, a strange sweetness, almost as if the building itself still remembered being full of laughter and whispers. Rafaela immediately saw that Gustavo wasn't used to places like this. He came in with a weighted look, fresh off a fancy hotel from the night before, his shirt too clean for a place that made mess feel welcome. She felt that old knot in her throat, like she wanted to apologize for the dirty floor, like she owed the city an explanation. But she didn't apologize. In fact, she felt the opposite. This theater showed who she really was. All she needed was to stand aside and let him listen to the walls. There were about 5 residents waiting for them. Dona Mirtez, always in bright red lipstick, patted down her short hair using the reflection from a cracked display case. Old Mr. Nestor brought a bag of photographs, and his voice boomed louder the moment he saw the darkened stage. The morning light seeped in through holes in the ceiling, illuminating motes of dust hanging in the air. It was beautiful and sad at the same time. Gustavo hesitated before stepping into the aisle. Rafaela noticed. He eyed the antique carpet as if afraid he'd dirty his shoes. She almost smiled, but held back. "Come on," she murmured softly. She climbed onto the back of one of the seats in the middle row, sitting on the top instead of sinking into the cushion. He paused nearby, arms folded. "Sit for a bit," she insisted, without looking at him. He waited a long moment, scanned the room, maybe checking if anyone was watching. Then, finally, he gave in, sliding slowly into a seat in front. The torn cushion creaked loudly under his weight. Gustavo's eyes went wide, startled, almost as if the chair might swallow him whole. Rafaela reached out and fiddled with a frayed thread along the edge. "Feel that? There's still life here," she whispered, mostly to herself. Silence fell, a thick silence, not heavy, but embracing. You could hear the scrape of some animal scuttling above the false ceiling, something tapping on glass outside, and the muffled sound of people's breathing in the big room. Rafaela could tell Gustavo was uncomfortable. He said nothing, just watched her every move with this peculiar attention, like he was searching for the secret behind her attachment to the rundown cinema. An older woman approached, handed him a small, yellowed photograph. "This is where I met my husband, you know," she said, shyly beaming. "He waited through 3 showings before he finally worked up the courage to hold my hand." Gustavo studied the photo, then glanced at her. His expression barely changed, but his eyes lingered on that crumbling image. For a while, no one spoke. That old snapshot, resting between his hands, weighed more than any argument could. Another story came from a man leaning against the wall. When my daughter was little, we'd come here to keep out the cold during double features. Used to be warm in here. He tapped the velvet seat beside him with a gentle hand. Gustavo listened, serious, almost stone-faced. But Rafaela noticed the repeated gestures, the way he stroked his beard, stared off into the distance. He was taking it all in. He wasn't just physically present. As she walked past him to pick up a stray sheet of paper, their shoulders brushed inadvertently. Just a fleeting second, if that. Still, both of them tensed. Rafaela caught her breath and froze for an instant. It hadn't been intentional, but the world seemed to pause with that touch. The skin at the base of her neck prickled. She wanted to pretend nothing happened, but glancing sideways she saw that he was still holding his breath, just as caught as she was. The stories kept coming. Words swirled through the dusty air, about dances, stolen kisses on the stairs, the last film shown before the cinema shut down. The place seemed to wake a little with those memories, the air vibrating in tune with people who dared to remember. Rafaela occasionally wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans. She didn't quite know if it was anxiety, embarrassment, or that old dread that everything here would someday be tossed aside. But she was angry at that fear, too. She wanted Gustavo to see that the value of this space couldn't be measured by any budget. Now and then, she caught him gazing upward at the cracked dome overhead, a detail most missed, but there and then, in that hush, she noticed a new light in his eyes. Not wonder, not yet. Maybe uncertainty. Maybe the beginning of something words couldn't reach. They walked together down the aisle, listening to more stories. On stage, mold was overtaking the hand-painted curtains. A shy little girl tugged at Gustavo's sleeve and showed him an old movie ticket. My mom saved it for me. He accepted the slip of paper awkwardly, and Rafaela caught the faintest tremor in his fingers. Tiny, but she saw it. She also saw him return the girl's smile. A small, rehearsed smile, but genuine. Soon enough, the residents drifted out, one by one. Only the two of them remained in the echoing hall. By then, the morning light had turned harsh and golden, almost cruel, pouring in behind them. Now the silence needed no excuse. And there, in that battered hallway of stories, Rafaela realized how much unsaid words were also memories. How missing out on things hurt just as much as losing them. How it was possible to miss something you'd only just found. Gustavo stood beside her, neither running nor retreating. One of his feet brushed hers, accidental, but neither of them moved away. She found herself hoping he'd say something, do something. Was it too soon? Maybe. But the touch was enough. Her skin still hummed, a silent reminder that there was desire here, even hidden. At the end, she met his gaze and, for a moment, wanted to ask him to stay, to listen more. But she didn't say a word. She just tucked that wish away. When they left, it seemed the old smell had seeped into their bones. And as they closed the door, each pretended not to notice their racing heartbeat. The cinema had found its voice, and the echo of that moment took root in them, slow and unhurried. Antique catalogs scattered across the worn wood floor, boxes flung open, the bittersweet scent of old tape lingering. The wind had only just stopped, and for the first time since they'd come inside, the theater was so quiet you could almost hear your own footsteps ringing off the peeling walls. Gustavo took off his jacket, unusual for him, and tossed it beside a broken, ancient projector. A fine cloud of dust rose, and he wrinkled his nose, like a kid who's just smelled something awful. Rafaela, across the makeshift counter, didn't even notice. Her eyes were down, jotting numbers into a battered notebook that looked 1,000 years old, fingertip gliding across yellowed paper. Just the two of them, surrounded by empty seats and memories of people who didn't come here anymore. This silence felt different than before. Not the offended, painful emptiness of the beginning, when everyone just tried to survive the discomfort. Now it felt like space that could be filled with something good, if only they had the courage. Gustavo tripped over a pile of old posters and muttered a quiet curse. He glanced at Rafaela, worried he'd ruined everything. But to his surprise, she barely reacted. She just shook her head, and a tiny smile flickered. Didn't really break through. Not yet. So, for 20 more minutes, they stayed focused on their tasks. Him, grumpy, trying to understand what the point of it all could be. Her, lost in her work, hoping she wouldn't have to make conversation, because she never quite knew what to say to someone like him, a complete outsider. Then Gustavo found a box of moldy books and pulled out something that looked like a toy microphone, but was actually a trophy. Bizarre, with a little duck on top. He turned to Rafaela with the most baffled expression. This was for what? Best synchronized swimming in a cinema, he joked, awkwardly, teasing in a boyish way that sounded more playful than arrogant. She froze for a second, and then the laughter escaped, soft at first, just a twitch at the corner of her lips. Then it rolled out, free and a little too loud, a sound she'd almost forgotten how to make. For a moment, it was as if a piece of her childhood tumbled out, right along with the smell of stale popcorn and the stains in the carpet. Gustavo's eyes lit up, really lit up. He looked surprised. He had rarely ever made anyone laugh. They used to say he was too dry, dull, humorless. But like this? Here? He grinned back, lopsided, a little silly, as if he'd just been caught doing something forbidden. In that split second, something changed, quietly, imperceptibly. The air felt different. Warmer, softer. Gustavo let his shoulders drop. He felt drawn to her, for no sensible reason. And he just stood there, looking at Rafaela as if determined to memorize her smile forever. It was so rare, so real, it felt like a secret between just the two of them. Rafaela blushed and hid her laughter, biting her lip to hold in the joy. But there was no more sadness in the room now, no sense that she was about to be dismissed or overlooked. She surprised herself, wondering how this rich boy, who seemed carved from stone, could be so human, as fragile as her. Pretending it meant nothing, she turned her back and rustled through a box of old film reels. But her fingers shook. After so many years avoiding smiles, used to expecting the worst from everything, suddenly it felt like it could be easy, even just for 10 minutes. The weight was gone. The cinema, full of ruin and dust, wasn't just sadness anymore. Gustavo ran his hand through his hair, smoothing the cut with a nervousness he hoped she wouldn't notice. He found himself thinking about childhood, couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that for no reason. His grandfather used to say the best moments didn't need a reason, only the right company. He never bought it. Maybe now it made sense. The late afternoon sun angled through the half-broken windows, drawing strips of gold across the floor. The air smelled like hope, subtle and quiet, as if the world meant to give them one last, gentle breath before everything got heavy again. It was Gustavo who finally broke the silence, his voice softer than usual. "Do you think this place stands a chance?" He didn't meet her eyes, just stared at the ceiling, but she understood what those words meant. It wasn't about the building. It was about them, about what could grow here, in this world of fragments and posters. "Lots of things seem impossible," she replied quietly, not looking at him. "But sometimes, a little care changes everything." He swallowed hard. The silence now brimmed with meaning. A deep breath between two people who knew more about hurt than about happiness. But just for today, just in this room, there was space for something new. They didn't say anything more. They worked together quietly, though every time they moved, their eyes met. They didn't smile again, but it didn't matter. Gentle warmth was already there, scattered on the floor, clinging to their hands, caught in the high ceiling. On their way out, late now, Gustavo held the door for her. The night breeze was sharp against their faces, and for a moment, neither of them wanted to leave. They paused in the entryway, silent. She thought about saying thank you, but kept quiet. He wanted to touch her shoulder, but stopped halfway. The smile lingered, behind their eyes, a secret stored away. The first crack in the ice, barely visible, but real. Or maybe the start of something they both pretended not to notice. For now, that was all there was. And somehow, it was everything. That night, the cinema was emptier than ever. The smell of old cement, rain-soaked dust in the corners, and the lingering July chill crept down the halls. Their work flashlights made yellow pools on the floor, but shadows preferred to pool thick against the walls. It was late, and only the sound of the storm outside, and Rafaela's footsteps among the torn seats, filled the space. Gustavo followed behind her, quieter than usual. There was something about that hush that made her throat burn, as if all the words she wanted to say no longer fit. They sat down on the old stage, legs swinging over the edge, staring out at the big emptiness where a screen used to hang. Each of them holding a terrible coffee, brewed in some battered old thermos she'd found in the storage room. For a while, neither spoke. The silence felt weird and heavy. Rafaela was all too aware of Gustavo's gaze, not sure if she wanted to meet it or hide behind her knees. She fiddled with the rim of her cup, feeling how quickly the warmth was escaping. The urge to talk came like a wave, an impulse to get it all out at once, just to see if the heaviness would lift. She took a deep breath, and her voice came out softer than she'd meant. You know, I've been coming here since I was a kid, when there was no one at home, when all the doors locked early and the windows went cold at night. My dad was always out, my mom. Well, I don't even know how many years it's been since she left for good. Every week, every other week, I'd come here. Old Silvio let me sit in the back row, sometimes didn't even make me pay. She was staring straight ahead, eyes too dry to cry, but her face showing the effort. Gustavo seemed unsteady. He wanted to say something, but held back. Every so often, he stared at the floor, fidgeted with his jacket, ran his hand through his hair. He seemed smaller here, as if weighed down by her words. It's strange, you know? She went on, voice cracking. I grew up thinking I'd learn to live alone. I did sort of. But some days, the ache in my chest feels exactly the same. For a moment, all you could hear was the rain tapping the broken windows. It was as if all her past had gotten stuck here, on dirty seats, in the scent of mildew, in the pattern of leaks overhead. Here, everything was memory. Everything was absence. She gripped the cup tight. The marks on her hands weren't just ink or paint from renovations, but tiny calluses, the sort that come from years of hard work, from having no real choice. Gustavo noticed. He watched the way she bit her lip, steadying herself. It was obvious now, even to him, that what was happening here ran deeper than the building's walls. This was another fight, another story. My last bet was giving everything to someone. She let out, barely a whisper, believing it was worth it. But in the end, everyone always leaves. One day I woke up and he was gone. No note, no explanation. Just silence again. Gustavo held his cup without sipping, staring at the ceiling like he'd find courage in the water stains. He didn't reply. His eyes shined, not with tears, but with the effort of biting back his own words, almost ashamed to show his wounds. He tried, I get it, really, then stopped. The silence between them shifted. It was like a bridge that wouldn't finish forming. He wanted to open up too, to lay himself bare. But he choked, feeling the knot tighten. For me, everything always felt like duty, you know? He ventured, but trailed off. Bowed his head, fingers drumming the cup, almost impatient. He imagined what his family would say if they saw him like this, so far from the roll of cold air. A thunderclap made them both jump, each trapped inside their own universe. Their eyes met, but there was something else in them now. A kind of bitter distance, not just physical, a way of holding back from touching, as if revealing one wound might split open another. Rafaela wanted to apologize for talking too much, but realized staying silent forever would be worse. So, awkwardly, she pushed the wet hair from her forehead and pretended to focus on a crack in the wall. She wished he'd say something, anything. But Gustavo seemed far away, gaze lost in the roof shadows. Here, she touched her chest gently, fingertip tracing her heartbeat. Sometimes it feels like this pain will never leave. And I'm tired of pretending it doesn't hurt. Beside her, an almost invisible gesture. Gustavo squeezing his cup until it crumpled, turning away when the subject stung. Inside, a strange urge to reach for her hand. Just a touch, nothing more. But he already knew. Not now. Not for her or for him. They sat there, side by side, each trapped in their own kind of pain. Now, though, they both knew about each other's scars. No more pretending. That raw honesty was frightening, heavy, but also chipped away at old ice. The rain outside slowed. The smell of earth drifted in through the broken window, mixing with coffee and longing. Rafaela wondered if one day he'd ever truly understand what this place meant. Gustavo, quiet, just felt a hollowness he'd never known before, the hollowness that comes from finally letting yourself feel. When it was time to leave, neither of them said goodnight. Just a brisk nod, glances crossing without connecting. But something had changed. Now, there was silent knowledge of each other's pain. They weren't strangers anymore. And maybe that little bit was enough to start again. Inside the ruined cinema, old scars finally found room to breathe. The city archive always carried that smell of damp paper. Mildew mixed with some sharp note of stale coffee. You know the kind? And that gray afternoon, even the air felt heavier. Light rain tapped the window, drops beating a rhythm, almost drowning out the small noises she made as she rummaged through the files. Nobody in there but her, apart from the far-off tick-tock of an old clock and the creak of a chair when she shifted. Rafaela spent hours searching for something. She wasn't even sure what. Maybe an answer. Maybe just an excuse to avoid facing her own fear head-on. Her fingers already marked by dust and paint, nails scratching the brittle edges of documents. It was maddening how dates never added up, how names got mixed around, how signatures changed. Small towns were like that. Everything handwritten, everything jumbled together. But there, wedged between yellowed receipts and nearly torn notices, her eyes fixed on a name. A name she knew. Her hand shook a little as she turned over that paper. At the top, the prim script of some long-gone secretary, something about repossession, eviction, a string of complicated words trying to mask the violence it was for a child. Gustavo's father's signature stamped at the bottom, like a seal of fate. The same handwriting she'd seen in the local paper years before. In an instant, everything went cold. Not with chill, but an emptiness that opens up in your chest when you realize the past you thought was buried has really just been sleeping. Her past and his, both trapped together in that document like a snare. Rafaela clutched the paper so tightly it nearly ripped. First came rage, a sharp, stubborn anger looking for an exit. Then the wave of disappointment, a queasy mix of shame, like someone had stolen the last scraps of trust she had left. Not only in him, but in people, period. Always the same. Start to believe, and life comes along to show you trusting is dangerous. She just stood there, staring at those letters. Her face burning, her cheeks wet before she even realized she was quietly crying. She wiped it away quickly on her sleeve, embarrassed, glancing around to make sure no one saw. Outside, the rain picked up. The noise of the drops swelled with every breath she managed to take. And suddenly, all that quiet in the records room became another kind of sound, the kind that lives inside your chest. The grayness outside, the damp smell, the memory of childhood, all of it weighed her down at once. She thought of Gustavo, the way he sometimes listened, struggling to read into every pause, the awkward way he tried to help, and that timid smile that was rare but, when it appeared, made time freeze for a second. It all felt so far away now. Did he know? Had he pretended all along, or just refused to see? Maybe it wasn't his fault, but God, it hurt. He was the son of the man who destroyed her home, her childhood. Their lives marked by the same wounds, just from opposite sides. The thought made everything knot inside again. She wanted to scream, to run out, leave the paper behind and forget. But she knew she wouldn't. She slipped the document into a folder, eyes red, breath shallow. The hallway to the exit felt longer than ever. Each step echoed too loudly on the tile. Outside, the city was drenched, the sky leaden, people scurrying for shelter. She stood under the awning, replaying everything she'd just learned, trying not to fall apart right there. Her mouth tasted strange, her stomach churned. Even the smell of wet earth felt more intense than usual. She hurried down the sidewalk, eyes down, dodging everyone. Her walk to the cinema happened in silence. The same silence that lived between her and Gustavo in their latest talks. Not comforting, not aggressive, just heavy. A silence overflowing with everything but peace. When she stepped into the dusty cinema lobby, Gustavo was there. Sitting in one of the old seats, fiddling with his phone, a blank, lost look in his eyes. The way his head raised told Rafaela he sensed something. But the words never came. She just made a small gesture, not really looking at him, and went straight for the back, pretending to inspect one of the torn posters on the wall like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. He watched her. She could feel it, even with her back turned. That sense of a weight pressing down, of someone trying to break through her silence with questions they couldn't ask out loud. He might not know why, but he definitely sensed something was off. Gustavo put away his phone, stood up slowly, hands in his pockets. He took hesitant steps, clearly debating whether to approach. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice low, almost afraid of the answer. Rafaela just nodded, without saying a word. There it was again, that distance, not measured in feet, but in the wall of uncertainty between them. The smell of dust, the cold in the big auditorium, It all seemed to push them further apart. Silence spoke for them. Only the faint buzz of old lights and echoes of voices that no longer existed filled the air, the ones she'd imagined since she was a girl. Her memories were made as much of absences as presences. For a few minutes, they stayed like that. Her turned away, him stopping short, trying to find a way through. Time stretched out, uncomfortable. Rafaela's pain thickened into resentment, fear braiding itself with anger, and Gustavo, lost, felt something was about to break, but didn't know what he was supposed to be fighting. And in that heavy silence, with every gesture too careful, that was when they drifted apart for real. Not words, but the weight of what remained unspoken pushed them away. The old thread of the past between them, as vivid and unmissable as the storm outside. Time felt thick in the late afternoon air. The scent of old dust and peeling paint hung in the cinema's lobby, mixed with some faded perfume and something that carried the sharp, raw memory of childhood. A childhood that, for Rafaela, was more wound than comfort. She was standing there, a little crooked, body tense, and her hands clenched around those crumpled papers that could have been explosives. The silence between them was nearly as strong as the words she wanted to throw. And still, it took a while for Rafaela to speak. Anger shook inside her, but the disappointment was deeper, so deep it hurt to breathe. Gustavo appeared from the hallway, his steps still steady, but his eyes searching for a clue. By the way Rafaela stood, he sensed something was wrong, but he didn't know what. There were days when he wished he could be that decisive, shielded businessman. Only now, it felt like the armor no longer fit so well. She raised the papers to her chest, her hands shaking too much to hide. "Did you know about this?" The question came out dry, but her voice wavered. The echo spread around the room, bouncing off empty chairs, torn posters on the walls, the bare stage that had once been the dream of so many. Gustavo didn't understand right away. He took the papers and skimmed them quickly. He recognized his father's construction company's old logo, official stamps, a history discounted in black and white. He felt a knot in his stomach, stronger than he'd expected. "Rafaela, this is..." He tried to find an explanation, but it felt strange. The words slipped away. His father, the childhood hero, sent to forcibly evict families. The same land now about to be sold, so many memories about to become rubble. She didn't let him finish. "It was your family. I was a child, Gustavo. I saw my mother beg to stay. I saw my grandmother cry. Do you have any idea?" It was hot, but a cold wind slipped in through the cracks in the broken windows. Rafaela wanted to shrink, to curl up. But not now, not again. Her pulse vibrated. Her heart beat as if it could shatter that heavy silence. Gustavo wanted to answer, wanted to apologize, but he felt his pride jammed in his chest. "I didn't know about this," he said quietly. "It was a long time ago. It wasn't me." She let out a short laugh, awkward, almost sad. Her eyes darkened and glistened. "But now it's you here to do it all over again. Tear down what's left, pretend it doesn't hurt, pretend it's just business. To you, it's all just concrete and signed contracts." A trace of pain flickered across Gustavo's face. He clenched his jaw, took a deep breath. He looked at the floor, then at her. He didn't know where to go, because part of him wanted to defend his own blood, but another part was already starting to question everything. For a moment, silence filled the room again, heavy. Rafaela looked away, but her trembling hands and face betrayed how much this cost her. Outside, thunder rumbled, shaking the cinema's old sign. Every part of her wanted to leave, to abandon Gustavo there with his guilt. But she stood still. She felt the tears burn, but refused to let them fall, not in front of him. "You only care about this because your grandfather asked you to. For you, it's just an old man's whim. But this place..." She pointed around, as if the whole building was crying too. "This cinema is all that's left for a lot of people. For my neighborhood. For me." Gustavo held his breath. He remembered the first time he'd come in here, thinking everything was old and pointless, blind to what didn't show up on the architectural plans. Only now, looking at Rafaela, he realized this building housed her ghosts, and his were here too. "What do you want me to do, Rafaela?" His voice came out hoarse, almost desperate. "I can't change the past. I needed this money, this project. What do you want from me?" She looked deep into his eyes. For a second, it wasn't fear or anger anymore. It looked like pure exhaustion from a lifetime of fighting what other people thought was right. I just want you to feel the weight of it. Feel what it's like to lose everything. Again, she bit her lip hard and turned away, but she couldn't hold back the first tear. She wiped it away quickly. I don't even know why I'm telling you this. You'll never understand. The floor seemed to sway. Gustavo wanted to rush to her, hold her, promise he'd try, swear he would never, never be like his father. But he stayed where he was, only managing to reach out a hesitant hand. She backed away, her back against the ticket counter. Inside, he screamed, but outwardly he was silent. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. It was as if every memory, every promise made by the father he'd admired, had been smashed to pieces on the floor. Outside, rain started pouring in earnest. The noise rattling against the broken windows mixed with their breathing, with choked-back sobs, with anger and disappointment that no longer fit inside either chest. Rafaela finally left, not looking back, leaving only the sound of hurried footsteps, the scrape of papers on the counter, her absence filling every inch of the cinema. Gustavo stayed. In the dark, surrounded by old photos, rows of empty seats waiting for an audience that would never return. The past crushed him. It wasn't just hers. Now it was his too. At that moment, all his pride meant nothing. All that was left was that childish fear of disappointing someone for the first time. The aching wish to be someone else, to be a little boy again, before everything broke. In the cinema, the echo of their argument lingered, like a film unwinding without a happy ending. They each left in opposite directions, carrying the rubble of their own choices, not knowing if there would ever be space for those ruins to become a true beginning. The cinema felt even emptier after their voices were gone. Her words still hung there, almost stuck to the peeling walls, echoing softly. Anger, sadness, weariness. Rafaela entered and pulled the iron door shut, the noise scratching the night silence. The faint band of streetlight couldn't pierce the bare hallway. Only her and the musty smell of old seats. Her hands shook, her eyes burned. She sat in the front row seat, the one, when she was a girl, that always felt like it belonged to another child, not her. She breathed in slowly. So much had been said, but it felt like there was still no air to explain what really hurt. Her face stayed hot, her mouth dry, her eyelids heavy from days without sleep. She tried not to cry. For whom? For herself? She'd cried too much already sworn not to let herself get hurt again by a man, by power, by some family from elsewhere that came to make all the decisions. But Gustavo wasn't just another outsider, and that's what scared her. Her body curled up, her hands twisted in her lap. She looked around, searching for a sign, anything, a memory that would promise it would pass. But now the cinema was only ruins and cold. Just ruins. And yet, the silence was almost comfortable, as if for a few minutes, no one expected anything from her. She could simply exist. She could just listen to the rain on the roof, drumming unhurried, and remember that here there had once been applause, laughter. The anger had burned itself out into exhaustion, and the fear sat motionless, asking if it would ever leave. But more than that, she wanted to believe, to accept someone's gesture, an outstretched hand. At the same time, it was as if a thorn pricked her at just the thought of Gustavo being there again, asking, touching, daring her to open up something she'd worked so carefully to hide. The weight was enormous. She thought of her childhood self, hiding in the dark waiting room of a shelter, of her mother leaving, of the silence that day. So many people came and left. So many promises shattered without warning. It was always the same. Trust was always the beginning of the end. The tears slid out without her noticing, their sound muffled by the worn seat fabric. Inside, she could still hear Gustavo's voice, tense, proud, but sad. He seemed lost too, even as he tried to hide, even as he tried to defend himself. Why did he unsettle her so much? Why couldn't she just hate him and move on? Across town, Gustavo didn't notice the rain soaking his expensive jacket. He just stood there in the square, under the dead glare of the old street lamps. The city slept, or pretended to. The empty streets almost mocked him. On the cold stone bench, he listened to the sound of his own heart, a kind of silence that made mistakes loom even larger. In the reflection of a storefront window, he saw his tired face, messy hair, shirt collar open as if the air were missing. For the first time in a long time, he felt ashamed of himself, of everything he'd inherited and dragged along. never once asking if it was right. He tried to recall Rafaela's words, but it was hard. It had all happened so fast, so heated. She'd spoken about his father, about scars that never faded, and he'd wanted to say it wasn't like that he was just a child too, in the middle of the chaos. But he hadn't said it. He'd hidden. He'd run. Now, alone, he felt the weight of what he'd never dared to face head-on. The fear of becoming his father, the fear of admitting she was right. The truth throbbed slowly, like when you bang your elbow and the ache lingers inside. He pulled out his phone a few times, but couldn't type anything. What would he say? Sorry. That was never enough. No one had ever explained to him how to truly ask for forgiveness. He thought of running back to the cinema, but felt rooted to the hard seat. His mind spun, trying to find some excuse not to be the villain. But deep down, he wanted to be saved, wanted to save Rafaela from her pain, even if just for a minute. The wind smelled of wet earth, some kind of hope in the air. Time seemed frozen. Every second dragged on endlessly. Gustavo closed his eyes and tried to remember his grandfather. The way he talked about afternoons at the movies, stories that made everything seem less cold. Was there still time to become something else? To stop repeating the same mistakes? Meanwhile, Rafaela felt the cinema closing in around her, as if the walls breathed sadness along with her. She tried to picture his face there, the awkward way he twisted his watch when he was nervous, the overly precise way he explained things, but still so human, so lost, too. The silence was heavy, but for a moment it seemed to bind them in that emptiness. Because, far apart, they felt the same thing: fear. Fear of being alone, fear of trusting, fear of messing up again. Words weren't needed in that moment. The sound of her own heart beat loud. Her fingertips trembled, wondering if someone might stick around, for real, someday. The rain hammered harder on the roof, a drip tracing a path through the shadow on the old screen. She let her eyes get lost in the dark stains, in the patchy pattern of tiny lights. She remembered being happy here, even with so little. Deep down, she wished she could go back to before, when loving was easy, but now it hurt, now it was dangerous. Affection arrived like a storm, turned everything upside down, and left only ruin. Somewhere else, Gustavo finally stood, still not knowing what to do. His steps were slow, as if every inch took unbelievable courage. Each of them, in their own corner, was starting to see. If they didn't choose to trust, if they didn't take a chance, the past would keep winning. And maybe, just maybe, that was what love was, admitting it still hurts, but keeping hope for a new beginning. In the cold room, Rafaela closed her eyes and listened to the echoes of the old films. And deep down, she knew nothing would change if she didn't let someone in. But for now, she let the silence take over. Because sometimes, just being alone is already a step. Just facing fear is enough to set the world turning again, even if only slowly. And outside, as the storm finally eased, in that fragile space between ending and starting over, they both drew a deep breath, still far from each other, but a little closer to themselves. The smell of old paint and dust still filled the hallway, even with the windows open, trying to air out any memory of the past. Rafaela was sitting on the side steps, knees pulled to her chest, hands dirty with lime, eyes too tired to cry even one more time. Her old coat was no match for the colorless afternoon. It had been a while since she'd heard footsteps around here. Only the sound of the wind moving through the broken doors, a back and forth that sounded like somebody breathing raggedly. She thought of leaving it all behind, just walking away, but every bit of the cinema seemed to scream, as if invisible forces begged her not to give up that fight, or on herself. She'd grown used to abandonment since she was a girl, people leaving suddenly, and always thought it safer to be the first one out. But now she couldn't move. That's when she really heard footsteps coming closer. A soft, tentative echo, like someone unsure if they should come in or not. For a second she thought of hiding. But she was tired of hiding. She wiped her face on her sleeve and waited for the intruder. It was Gustavo. He stopped in the bright strip of the main door, his suit rumpled, tie loose at the knot. He no longer looked like that cold, hard businessman from their first meetings. He was pale. His hair was messy, and his expression strange. Not angry, not rushed. His were the eyes of someone who wanted to say sorry, but hadn't found the words. He spent a few seconds just looking at her, as if not quite sure he should go on. The silence was heavy, but not threatening. It was like those pauses in old movies, when you hold your breath without realizing. Gustavo took a slow step, his shoes creaking across the wooden floor. He sat near her, but left plenty of space between them, enough for all their missed moments and unspoken truths. He didn't try to touch her, didn't say hello, just took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a second, as if the weight of it all was about to crush him. When he spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper. This morning, I went to the construction company to sign the contract. The one for demolition. He bit his lip, shook his head, and fiddled with his nervous hands. I couldn't do it. Rafaela looked at him, unable to tell if it was fear, a lie, or just another thing that hurt. Her heart was pounding, but her face gave nothing away. Inside, she trembled. What do you mean by that? She tried to keep her voice steady, though tiny doubts swirled inside her chest. Gustavo swallowed hard. His eyes met hers, then dropped away quickly, as if ashamed. I'm not going to sign. I'm not demolishing the cinema, he said. I want to help save it. Not because it's going to make money. Not because it's what's expected of me. The words came slowly, heavy. I kept thinking about how you talk about this place, he went on. How all of this means something, even if nobody else sees it. He took a deep breath, as if he needed to convince himself, or maybe her. I always thought it was pointless to fight for stuff like this. But you helped me see it differently. The silence that followed wasn't cold, nor light. There was something new there. A small hope, trembling, hoping not to be crushed by another disappointment. Rafaela almost smiled, but something held her back. She remembered everything she'd lost trying to trust people. Remembered empty promises, hugs that ended too soon, vows nobody ever kept. Why now? She asked, more forcefully than she expected, as if she needed him to prove it was real, not just another easy promise. Gustavo hesitated, and for a moment he looked like a little boy again, waiting for approval. Because I've never chosen anything important before. I always did what my father said, what the company wanted. But I don't want to be just another guy who only destroys things, his voice faltered. He rubbed his face quickly, as if brushing off a stubborn sadness. I don't want to repeat his mistakes. Or mine. Now you could hear raindrops hitting the cinema roof. A quiet, persistent sound. The scent of wet earth drifted inside, almost washing away the taste of old debris. Right there, between them, something shifted. They shared their fear without having to say everything out loud. Finally, Rafaela drew a deep breath. Her gaze found his again, and this time she didn't look away. She saw the fatigue, the worry, but she also saw, and it was hard to admit, the start of something honest. If you really want to, if this is for real, she said softly, afraid to break the moment. We're going to have to fight the construction board. And City Hall. They'll fight back to the end. Gustavo nodded, and a shy, almost awkward smile appeared. I know, but I want to stand by you. This time it's my choice. There was a silence, not empty, but full of possibility. She could feel his hand near hers, but they didn't touch. It was as if that almost touch held everything that came before a hug. Fear, longing, hope. Rafaela allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment. For the first time in so long, she felt not just the weight of mistakes, but a strange kind of lightness. As if the past could finally start to lose its grip. They stayed there, listening to the rain pick up. Outside, the streetlights began to glow, and inside, she let hope take root. She didn't know what was coming, but for the first time, she wanted to find out, with him. The smell of fresh paint still mixed with old dust as the first people started arriving that chilly morning. Around 8, there was already movement in the square in front of the cinema. The old marquee, partly restored, cast a shadow over a makeshift row of buckets, ladders, and paintbrushes. No one spoke loudly, but there was a different sort of energy in the air. It was as if everyone had come for a party, not a possible demolition. Rafaela hurried past Gustavo, balancing 2 paint cans. She didn't look at him directly, but she felt him watching her, the same attentive look, only now it carried something else, almost a plea. She still felt too exposed to meet his gaze openly, but as they passed, their shoulders nearly touched. Nearly. Small gestures, almost invisible, had become the way they spoke without words since the night he promised to stand by her. Gustavo grabbed tools right after, picking up more than he needed just to keep his hands busy. He didn't dress like the others, Button-down shirt rolled to the elbows, body still tense, but somehow looked smaller in the chaos of the work party. He stopped beside Rafaela on the makeshift stage, the wooden set still bearing signs of the old fire. She wiped sweat from her brow without thinking, and he offered his handkerchief. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she accepted, feeling his fingers brush softly against the skin of her hand. There was something in that awkward, brief touch that said everything their mouths refused to say. More neighbors trickled in groups. People of all ages. Kids picking up shards of glass, old folks hauling their battered stools, shopkeepers bringing bread, thermoses of coffee, fruit in polystyrene trays. A young woman with lilac-dyed hair handed out flyers she'd drawn herself, showing the cinema with a big smile on the front. And a guy with braces offered to fix the front lights. Rafaela was surprised by every new face. There was something magical about seeing the city move for one cause. She caught herself smiling without realizing, almost relieved. Maybe, in that moment, she was tasting something she'd always lacked, belonging. On the other hand, fear lurked behind every smile. Fear that it would all fall apart at the last moment. Of losing everything right when it started to matter. Gustavo was always close by, not just physically present, but with a kind of silent resolve, a look that searched for hers at the oddest moments, and darted away again, as if embarrassed to be caught. When she directed someone adjusting the old popcorn counter, he listened without interrupting, as if learning from her was more important than pretending to know it all. Sometimes he smiled to himself as Rafaela turned to give some instruction. His scruffy beard hid part of his face, but his eyes betrayed a kind of pride. On the stage, the lights began to flicker. The guy fixing them, sprawled under the fuse box, yelled out jumbled instructions. The old tune of a portable radio filled the lobby, shifting between country songs and static. An old woman handed out sweetbread, and for some reason, everyone accepted it as if it were a tradition. The smell filled the cinema, cake blending with old must. A strange, comforting scent, one that only made sense if you've ever missed something simple. All the while, Rafaela watched details from the corner of her eye. Gustavo improvising a ladder from crates so a teenager could hang up colorful flags. The little boy climbing on a chair to tape up posters with the wrong kind of tape, nearly falling, but Gustavo catching him by the shoulder, awkwardly. And that moment, so quick, almost secret, when Gustavo leaned his head on the wooden door, as if he needed just a second to breathe before plunging back into the chaos. They shared tools, paint, silences. Rafaela felt the heat of Gustavo's hand graze hers on purpose when she reached for a putty knife. She wanted to pull her hand back, but didn't. The silence that followed, their hands still close, was thick, full of thoughts neither dared say out loud. Does he get scared like I do? She wondered quickly, before the crash of a bottle breaking in some corner of the foyer distracted her. The sun climbed slowly, seeping through the cracks in the broken roof. The first golden beams warmed the cold floor. A neighborhood dog rushed in, skidding between the seats. Everyone laughed, except Gustavo, who looked at Rafaela for a moment, as if allowing himself to laugh, too. And he did, even if it was only with his eyes. As the day wore on, it was as if the cinema's walls grew brighter with the people. There was something beautiful and sad about so much hope poured into a place that had been left behind for so long. Gustavo quietly realized he'd never seen this kind of happiness. He'd always been at forced parties, business events, all smiles but no joy. Here, the smiles were crooked, smeared with paint, ugly even, but so much more honest. When they broke for lunch, they sat together on a step of the stage. Rafaela stared at her own shoes, streaked with dust, too afraid to say anything that might break what was building there. Without saying much, Gustavo handed her a water bottle. She took it. For a moment, the two of them listened to the city's pulse outside. Car horns, trucks, shouts, hurried footsteps. But inside it was just silence. And in the silence, there was a new sort of comfort. He took a deep breath, as if to apologize again. But he didn't. He just said, in a voice softer than usual, "Do you think we'll make it?" She took a while to answer. And for the first time, she admitted to herself that she wanted to believe. Not out of stubbornness, not to prove anything to him. Just because, sitting there beside him, she felt like things truly could change. "I don't know, but I can't picture giving up anymore," she murmured, almost a whisper, not looking at him. Gustavo smiled, lopsided, like someone finding shelter in a shared doubt. And it was enough, even without promises. Just the city's background noise, and the cinema learning to breathe again, like the heart of a scared child learning to trust one more time. That evening, the square in front of the cinema was too small for so many people. Someone hung a makeshift banner. "This is where the city resists." Some people hugged, others wept quietly. Rafaela watched Gustavo fix his shirt sleeve, smooth his hair, trip over a toolbox, and laugh at himself. For a moment, their eyes met and lingered. And out of sight, their hands touched quickly at their sides. It wasn't a kiss or a confession, but it was almost everything. Right there, amid the voices and the lights lit after so long, they were finally a team. The morning of the festival arrived a bit overcast, with a biting cold that seemed to slip in through the cracks of the old theater. Outside, the streets were busier than anyone expected in that forgotten corner of the city. All kinds of people, families hand in hand, children jumping in puddles, older ladies carrying bags full of flowers. For a moment, it was as if everyone had decided to bet that this place, which had nearly come crashing down, could, in fact, be a beginning. Rafaela stood with her back to the main door, adjusting a red banner on the worn-out seats, trying to stick down the ends with masking tape. Her hands felt sweaty, her heart racing ahead of her. Sometimes, without noticing, she would hold her breath, afraid this day might be stolen from her at the very last minute, like so many other things had already been. Each loud knock on the door made her shrink a little inside. The noise mixed with children's laughter, with the smell of popcorn someone was making at the back of the hall. And even so, everything there felt fragile, like a dream about to fade away. Rafaela's eyes flew over the peeling ceiling, the hastily painted walls, the posters taped up wherever they'd fit. She saw beauty, but she also saw the fear that it could all end before it even began. That's when Gustavo appeared in the doorway, wearing a simple suit that did nothing to hide his nerves. He had dark circles under his eyes, a sign of sleepless nights, and ran a hand through his hair in that way he only did when trying to swallow some surge of anxiety. Their eyes met for a long moment. It was strange noticing just how much had changed between them. Desire was there, of course, but above all else, there was respect, the kind that makes you want to stay close, even if just in silence. Outside, a commotion started, drowning out the old songs playing softly from the stage. Suddenly, harsher voices, distant sirens. Inspectors had arrived, surrounded by piles of paperwork and thick files. 3 suited men and a police officer forcing his way through the crowd. Rafaela's chest tightened. It was like being a child again, back to when adults decided everything and all you could do was wait for the worst. The crowded cinema, that fresh air of hope, and suddenly, the fear that it would all vanish, with a signature, a stamp, a shrug. Her hand was trembling as she reached for the microphone, but Gustavo got there first. For an instant, she thought about stepping back. She figured he'd stick to the script, with that usual businesslike, formal manner. But when he moved ahead of the inspector and asked for silence, his voice was hoarse, almost breaking with nerves. He looked at the table of old ladies, the kids packed into the front row, every single face there. Only then did he fix his gaze on the team of inspectors. And, for some reason, he looked to Rafaela too, as if searching for courage. "You're right to follow the rules, I get that," he said, steady, but not cold. "But this place," he took a deep breath, gripping the microphone hard, his knuckles white. "This place isn't just old walls. It's not just paperwork. Here there's life. There's the story of people who went invisible for far too long." No one made a sound, just breathed slowly, the kind of silence that seemed to weigh down the floor. Gustavo pressed on, his voice steadier. "I was brought up to see everything as numbers, profit, property." He gave an awkward little laugh, catching his breath. "But, not too long ago, someone showed me that what really matters can't ever be measured like that." His eyes searched for doubt, afraid of being judged. You can tell when a man doesn't know how a sentence will end, but says it anyway. This cinema was abandoned. But it came back to life. Not just through repairs, but because the whole city came together. Because someone believed. He looked at Rafaela again. "And made me believe, too." The inspector, fidgety, raised a paper. But before he could argue the law, something else happened. One of the local ladies, that short one with her hair in a bun, who always brought cakes to the meetings, stood up and came to the stage. She didn't say a word, just took a flower from her pocket and set it at the edge of the makeshift red carpet. A few kids followed her, each with a little slip of colored paper, and placed them in the same spot. The silence became a kind of collective embrace. No one could quite explain it, but somehow, at that moment, the entire town seemed to say, "Enough. You're not erasing our story today." Gustavo looked at Raffaella again, now with a kind of pride that seemed foreign to him. It wasn't just for the project. It was for her, for the courage it took to stand her ground, even when afraid. Raffaella, still holding that hint of a smile, gently let go of the microphone as it passed from his hand to hers. A quick touch, but so full of unspoken care it almost felt like a shout. She didn't need words. She just lifted her eyes, letting her hair fall a bit over her face. She dared to look at the people, and saw hope. For the first time in years, she felt pride instead of fear. She knew that, whatever happened that day, she wasn't alone anymore. Gustavo stayed close by, a little nearer than etiquette allowed, their shoulders nearly touching, hands apart, but close enough for the promise of a future gesture. When the inspector tried once more to interrupt, the crowd stepped forward, with small words of support and hesitant applause. The sound, slow at first, grew into pressure at the side of the stage. They wouldn't leave without a fight. The microphone went back to Gustavo, but he said nothing. This time, he just reached for Raffaella's hand, open, waiting. The touch was light, but complete. She felt a chill run from her wrist to her neck, and, for a moment, thought back to all the times she had wished she could trust. It was simple, but it was real. There, holding hands, open for all to see, it was like saying, "It's time to start again." The inspector lowered the paper, beaten not by arguments, but by the weight of the town. Smiles spread through the hall. Outside, the skies cleared a bit, timid sunlight filtering through the cracks. The festival announcement played over the speakers, applause, teary eyes, people hugging. Raffaella and Gustavo looked at each other again, wordless. But for the first time, there was no need for words. The audience had already gone, the sound of laughter fading into the echo of the nearly empty room. The theater lights were still on, but now it was just the two of them. Raffaella sitting on one of the restored seats, drawing her legs up to her chest, staring at the empty stage. Gustavo was leaning against the opposite wall, loosening his tie as if, at last, he could breathe again after all this time. It was a good kind of silence, the kind that makes you feel lighter, suspended. The exhaustion showed, but her gaze had changed. There was a new brightness, something between relief and anticipation. For a while, they just sat there, sharing the silence. No need to fill the space with talk. Gustavo stared at his hands, rubbing his thumb as though to squeeze out the last remains of nerves. Raffaella watched from the corner of her eye. She caught herself smiling, surprised at her own urge to draw closer. She was the one who broke the silence. "You know, I thought I'd never feel at home again." Her voice was quiet, but steady, like a secret finally freed. Gustavo looked up, his eyes full of care, not with any rush to answer, but with someone who knows how to listen. "You don't have to fight on your own anymore, Raffaella." It was simple, but it hit her deep. Inside, she felt a wave of relief tangled with old fear, the fear of trusting. She drew a shaky breath, eyes welling up with tears she made no effort to hide. It wasn't sadness, just the old weight starting to leave. "I spent so long closing doors, thinking it was safer that way, that nobody deserved my trust or my time. Not even me." She swallowed hard, really looking at him now. "But today, here, I know I want to try again. Not because of the theater, not for the town, but because you stayed. Even after seeing who I really am." He moved closer, sitting beside her, just enough for his shoulder to brush hers. No hurry, nothing more than was needed. He looked ahead, out at the empty seats. "My grandfather," Gustavo began, voice low, almost a confession. "I never understood why he wanted this place so badly. I thought he was stuck on old things, tired memories. I spent my life running from this past, thinking only the future mattered. But deep down, I guess I was always afraid I'd feel too small, insignificant." Silence returned, but now it was comforting, like a warm blanket at the end of a long, hard day. Raffaella touched his hand, slow, feeling the warmth, the safety in their fingers entwined. I think I spent so long trying to prove I was strong that I forgot how to ask for help. She laughed, the sound trembling. You have no idea how much I wanted to fight you. And at the same time, how much I wanted you to not give up on me. Gustavo's eyes shone, and it wasn't just because of the soft theater lights. He wiped a hand over his face, trying to collect himself. I'm not going to give up, he said quietly. Almost to himself, but she heard. For a moment, they just breathed together. She smelled the old seats, the warmth of his arm. Remembered the times she'd been cold in that abandoned building, the damp floor, the dust clinging to her clothes. She thought of the girl she'd been, hiding in the shadows, afraid of the dark and of being left behind. And looked at Gustavo, just as uncertain as she was, but willing to stay by her side, even if he didn't know how. There's something I need to tell you, Gustavo said, hesitantly, locking eyes with her. About my father. About what happened to your family. Rafaela's heart clenched, but she didn't pull away. She just squeezed his hand tighter. I know. I found out a while ago. And for a long time, that was my greatest pain. I wanted to hate your family, wanted someone to blame for everything my mother went through. But looking at you, I realized we don't have to carry other people's burdens forever. The admission came out with tears and laughter, a relief from someone finally letting go of old resentment. Rafaela rested her forehead on Gustavo's shoulder, allowing herself to be vulnerable and, at the same time, strong in an entirely new way. They stayed there, crying with laughter and laughing with tears. The empty cinema slowly began to fill up with stories, with sighs, with everything they no longer had to hide. Gustavo tucked a lock of hair from her face, his gesture gentle, almost clumsy, and said, quite simply, without any rehearsed speech, I want to be part of your story, no matter how hard it is. I want you to trust me, and if one day I mess up, I want us to forgive each other. Do you promise? She nodded, smiling through the tears. I promise, she murmured. But only if you promise to. He pulled her closer, and it was a tight embrace, the kind that puts all the broken pieces back where they belong. The weight of unspoken words melted away, and in the space that remained, something new was born. Hope, maybe. Or just the peace that comes from realizing that, somehow, they had found in each other what they'd spent a lifetime missing. Among the empty seats and the smell of old wood, they laughed and cried a little more. And even without saying a word, they knew. Here, in this nearly rebuilt cinema, it was the beginning of a different story. Not about the past or pain, but about two tired hearts who, at last, had chosen to trust together. Outside, the night was calm, no storm in sight. For the first time in a long while, both of them were home. The lights of the old cinema had never seemed so alive. The freshly restored marquee glowed over the crowded sidewalk like a promise kept. A crowd gathered out front, people of all ages laughing, bumping into each other with no rush, as if that corner of the city was breathing again. Inside, the unmistakable aroma of popcorn crept everywhere, mixing with the new varnish on the recovered seats. For an instant, Rafaela just watched, from a distance. She leaned against the cold foyer wall, fingers still dust-stained, and looked around with a mix of pride and disbelief. Her heart beat fast, as if that room had always held, not just old films, but the pieces of what she'd once dreamed of getting back. Gustavo stood beside her, saying nothing. He just gently squeezed her hand, and she felt in his warm palm a silent plea to stay right there, together. No words then, no applause between them. It was as though only the two of them existed in that rebuilt world. For a moment, she wondered if she deserved to be there. If she could allow herself to feel so much again after growing used to losing. She looked at her hands, the faint red marks on her wrists, reminders of debris, of cement, of the fear of failing all over again. Was it all worth it? Could it crumble again in a heartbeat? But Gustavo caught the change in her silence, the way she still pulled inward, fearing abandonment. She felt his eyes, soft and uncertain, searching for hers. Almost unbelievable. How could this practical man, so used to numbers and contracts, now be nothing but quiet, vulnerable, waiting for her to look back? The MC called their names. It was time to cut the ribbon. The lights, the buzz, all the build-up. None of it mattered next to the barely there touch of Gustavo's fingers intertwining with hers. And she realized that, this time, she didn't want to let go. They walked the aisle together, crossing the red carpet, each step somehow both heavy and light. The audience clapped. Mrs. Maria from the grocery smiled with teary eyes. The mayor pretended to be serious, but couldn't hide his choked voice. Plain folk, people who'd lost and won with that cinema. Everyone watching Rafaela as if she'd brought back something precious, a fragment of a better past. Inside, Rafaela still felt that lingering fear of failing, but she held tight to Gustavo's hand. Each of his small gestures soothed the part of her most afraid. All she could manage, through trembling lips, was a whispered thank you. He didn't reply. He just ran his thumb gently over her skin, tracing a path backward over her scars. When they cut the ribbon together, it was as if something broke free inside them. A stone kept in the chest for years, finally finding a place to rest. The snip of the scissors, the city's applause, camera flashes, all of it spun around them. But that bubble of shared understanding never popped. They were there, whole. Afterward, in the renovated lobby, children ran around, grown-ups swapped memories and jokes. The noise was loud, but in the midst of laughter, Gustavo looked at Rafaela again. The way he smiled wasn't cold anymore, or even all that sure of himself. That strange blend of pride, surprise, and tenderness. She realized she was discovering the Gustavo that lived behind the perfect suit, a man who could feel deeply without saying a word. In the middle of the chaos, he leaned in and asked if she wanted to sneak away for just a few minutes before the big film. She almost laughed. She glanced at the side door, the dark corridor where staff would slip through. For months, that spot was nothing but rubble and shadow. Now, it felt sacred. They slipped behind the curtains, the party a bit muffled. They stopped by a restored stained glass window, moonlight weaving colors on the floor. Gustavo traced his finger through the patches of light painted over her face. Rafaela felt every touch as a silent answer to the aches that lingered. For a while, they just stood there. The silence was heavy, but gentle, not empty, full of everything words could never hold. At last, Gustavo confessed that he'd never believed in places having a soul. But looking at this theater, at her, he admitted he'd been wrong his whole life. In a quiet voice, he said he was sometimes afraid of not knowing how to be different from his father, of still hiding behind those same cold walls. Rafaela closed her eyes, her lungs filling with the scent of must and varnish. She said, almost voiceless, that she'd always been afraid to trust, afraid of being left behind all over again. But she was there. For him. For herself. She wanted to try. Promise me, she whispered, that if the fear comes, we won't run. Gustavo squeezed her hands. I promise. Every time. And if you want, we'll start over as many times as it takes. And right there, in that patchwork of colored light, they decided to write a different beginning together. The party's chaos faded into the background, applause turning into a backdrop for a silent agreement that from now on, no fear would be stronger than their desire to stay. They walked back to the hall, hand in hand. The entire theater seemed to hum, as if the town wanted to embrace them both. Kids tossed popcorn in the air, elders wiped away tears with no shame. Rafaela finally understood that saving the cinema was only half the journey. The rest was giving herself permission, with him, to dream again. To start another story. In a room steeped in both past and future, they knew the best was still ahead.